Okay.
I like both of those.
All right, we'll call the meeting to order. Seeing that it's 1:30. Looks like all offices are represented. Notice the meeting was properly posted on March 21st, 2024. Let's go ahead and do item 1 real quick. Is there any discussion or anything related to an item that's on the watch list?
Yeah, I would move to remove the 2 line items for the county clerk.
Okay, we got a motion to remove the county clerk line items on the watch list. Do we have a second? We've got a second. Cassie, did you get who did it? Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it.
Can we vote on that we talked about it too?
Is there a motion to accept the words that came out? I think that was all encapsulated. Okay.
Yeah, I think so too.
Is that the shortest item ever that's stayed on the watch list?
Yep.
We aimed
a
a
week.
week.
A week long on the watch list?
Motion to not.
Look at the money we've saved the county.
Exactly.
It's like that.
There's always
It was on sale.
There's always $3,000.
No, you spent 5. Anything else on the watch list? If not, we'll move on to item 2. Discussion possible action regarding the Oklahoma County employer health premiums rate effective July 1, 2024. John's here. I think you guys had a pretty in-depth conversation here a week or so ago. I was watching it remotely, enjoying all the conversation.
Just as a point of clarification, so this made it out of this committee once. So is there a specific reason why it came back? I mean, I know the budget board sent it back, but is there something specific that we need to be focusing on, or?
That is a good question.
Well, I can, from my standpoint, watching, and I didn't participate here or at budget board, but to get to the rates, I think, and I do understand that historically we follow the actuary recommendation on employer rates. Employee, we've deviated frequently, but I think when we're looking at it, what I would like to see when we're looking at employer rates is what our anticipated expenses are for that next year. You know, the actuary looks at, is it 3 years, John? 3 years, but they put more emphasis on the most recent year.
Yeah, they look at the most recent year, and that's what they add trend to.
Yeah.
They look at the 2 prior years just to see if there's anything sticking out, but they really base it based on the most recent year.
Which was, I mean, we all know in our cycle, it was our bad year, right? That they looked at, which was last year. It was worse than, our previous years. And then they add the trend, and then they also add a buffer on top of the trend because we don't put the rates into effect immediately, right?
Yeah.
So what I would like to see is kind of what our actual performance is. And I know John's provided us, that information in the past. He's done some analysis. But generally speaking, we always beat the industry trend, right? Mm-hmm. So
over many years, some years, of course, we went way up. But
right.
Over
On
extended
average.
time,
On average, and we beat it pretty substantially on what the recommendation is. So just personally, what I would like to see is kind of what our average is as far as our increase, the actual increase, and how that compares to those actuary rates. And that way we can determine whether the 20% is where we need to be. Because if it is, that's what we need to do, right? But if it's less than that, whether it's 5%, 7%, 10%, whatever it is, I think we need to first kind of come up with what we're comfortable with as far as an estimation of expenses, because that's what the actuary is doing. Even though there's rates up there that they come up to, really what they're doing is they're looking at what they think the expenses are going to be, and then we back into the rates from the expenses, because all of the rates and all of the revenue, which most of the revenue is rates, is what we need to pay for whatever those expenses are going to be, right? So I think the first thing that we have to do is know kind of where we're at on expenses so that we can then back into what those rates are going to be. So that's kind of where I am, is just wanting a little bit.
Are the numbers different this week than they were last week, or are they the exact same?
No, same thing, and just a reminder, we have, look at it as a pie, it's how we're gonna, what makes up the funding's a pie. And, part of it's through employer contributions, part of it's through employee contributions, part of it's through retiree contributions, part of it's through a transfer, and part of it's through the employer contributions. So it's same numbers, it's just how do you wanna fund that pie? You wanna change one to be more, one to be less.
So no numbers changed.
Yeah. Yeah, and there was discussion about the $1 million and that kind of stuff. And I think after, watching it, listening to the meeting and kind of talking to folks afterwards, I was just thinking, over 11 years, I've never really thought to ask how exactly where are we coming up with those benefit numbers. And I know Danny helped a lot in through that process, but kind of, having more in-depth conversations on that. So I kind of appreciate, what's happened and where we are, because it's kind of stoked some conversations about the way we've done things, the way we're currently doing things, the way maybe we could do things. And it's been an educational experience for me. So I really appreciate that. When I look at, when we talk about, I heard the overestimation on employer rates. I think after talking to John, looking at the numbers and talking to the finance office, and Jason and Carrie and Jennifer have been very helpful with me, being out for a couple weeks, kind of catching up. I think one thing that we maybe fail to capture every year is when we look at the expenses and what we think the expenses are going to be. And then we say, okay, we need all of these revenues, the pie that John was talking about. We need all of that to equal at least what these expenses are going to be, right? So we do our estimate of needs and we say, okay, I need, in a particular department, I'm going to have 5 individuals that are going to have family insurance and 2 that are going to have single insurance, and say that equals $10,000 for the year. It's more than that, but let's just say $10,000. And that's loaded in my budget. And, employee benefits, we say part of that pie, the employer rates, is going to be $19 million. Well, that part of that $19 million, how we came up with that was the $10,000 that I'm budgeted to put in there, right? And if I don't put that $10,000 in there, that pie isn't going to be whole, right? Well, the way we do it is the employer premiums are paid monthly based on the employees that are on the plan that month. So when we have turnover or we have positions that aren't filled, that money sits in the department benefit account, but it doesn't go over to employee benefits. In the expenses, it's not a one-for-one, employee versus the expense. I mean, one employee off doesn't equal a reduction in the overall expense of the plan necessarily, right? So I think that is where a lot of this $1 million or whatever that we're looking at that we may or may not be short is that it was budgeted, but it may not be actually going over there because of the way we kind of funded. And so after talking, I talked to Christy a little bit today, and I appreciate the time. I know we won't make a decision on this, and it's not on here anyway, but as we're going through the process, I've been kind of thinking about how we can maybe fix that or solve that and, going forward, whether that is, as far as general fund goes, instead of doing it a 12th, a 12th, a 12th, a little bit out of everybody's general fund budget, maybe do it as the same dollar amount that we're talking, but do it as a transfer in lump sums, and it doesn't actually go in the budget, or maybe there's a variation or whatever. And I don't know if that'll work. I don't know the mechanisms that may need to change. I don't know if it would work, but it wouldn't be feasible. I don't know, but I just wanted to bring that up that way as we're coming into our discussion on the budget and the processes and procedures and everything that we do, that, you know, some of you might know that that's kind of something that I'm looking at, and that way you guys can think about it and tell me, hey, it's a terrible idea because of X, Y, or Z, or, you know, maybe something like that could work, but what about if we did it like this, or, you know, whatever. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, but I think that may be where some of that $1 million, Jennifer, on what you're looking at, are you kind of seeing?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Inevitably, our bid, I mean, I assume that most, especially departments that have some turnover, benefits is always more positive at year end. So in other words, we would lapse that money, and salaries is generally in the negative. And so at the end of the year, what we end up doing is we end up moving money from benefits to salaries, because what happens is, like you said, when you have that staff churn. So I'll give an example. I won't give the name, but a person just retired and his last check was $30,000.
Mm-hmm.
So the only way to eat that is to either just wait that out, which then in turn makes the benefits, you know, look heavier at the end of the year, but then it significantly changes salaries because we don't really need or want to leave that position vacant. So like for us, it's kind of a weird balance. But yeah, inevitably, and that at one point, there's no doubt that the benefits are again being bolstered in the months we're not budgeted versus actual. That's I think that's
That's a good example, because when you got someone paid out and you said you didn't have it in salary, so you move it from benefits to salary to pay that, you gotta pay it. But now you've taken dollars that really were budgeted to be a revenue for employees' benefits, but.
yeah. And usually don't happen. I mean, of course, we don't do that until when everybody has put their transfers on May, you know.
Right.
So, but it inevitably is going to happen. I mean, this year when we anticipated it, I mean, we're going to be 40,000 long in benefits and 8,000 short in salaries, you know, or something, you know. So we have to do the shuffle.
Well, and it may be that if we did something like what I was talking about, we may need to, you know, if we're funding benefits in a way that, and we've all kind of had this conversation around the table in the past. I don't think I'm alone in this statement, but I would like to see us have a balance in our employee benefits account, a cushion, so that when we have years like we had last year, we're not passing the hat. If we had $3 or $4 or $5 million in that account where we were flush, the only thing that we can spend that money on, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's things associated with claims. It's not John going out and buying new computers, buying new furniture, nothing like that. It is actual things, expenses related to people, to individuals that are on the plan, their medical care. So those are expenses that we're always going to have, right?
I hear Danny's ghost sitting over here saying.
Yeah, I know.
Benefits. We fund benefits.
Yeah.
So
I
if we had that, then we wouldn't necessarily need every year on the watch list to leave $1.5 million or $2 million on there. But instead, we could have on the watch list $1.5 million or whatever for transfers for exactly what Brandon is mentioning on those payouts. Because John mentions it quite a bit, the average age of our workforce here is a little bit older, and a lot of that is not people just coming when they're older. It's they've been here a long time, right? So when you have employees that have been here a long time, it's really hard to replace them, and we hate to replace them, but when they leave, a lot of times that means that there is a pretty significant buildup of leave that's owed. So, and we have to pay that. We do. So maybe we, reserve, some money set aside, kind of look at what past performance has been as far as the need for those types of dollars, and make sure that we're not going to be in a position where we can't pay.
This particular example is a lot too, because you still have some of that lawsuit leave. that we can never get rid of until they separate. They certainly don't use it because now it's worth way more than when you got it. And so, the
John,
county
do you
negotiated that
feel that
back
this
backwards.
$1 million flux is some of this that we're discussing, or is it more attributed to just the overall use of the plan, or is it
Well,
a
what we see,
combination?
what we see it on expenses, we're one of the only, I think, accounts that are variable. They can go up and down, everything can go up and down. It's all based on utilization. So we throw a number out there and think, hey, this is a good estimate for expenses. That could go 5 million over, it could go 5 million under. Now, premiums and revenue, of course, that's more fixated. So it's just based on the heads of the employees, single or family, the premiums that go into the account. So when I looked at the budget, on the premium side, we estimated, I don't have it right here, but we estimated a bigger number that we're gonna bring in, basically. And that was based on employee counts, okay? But to add to that, my estimate is maybe claims, we're doing way better than last year, but claims may end up a little higher than estimated. Prescriptions might too, so that kind of adds. There's two different several issues, but I really like what Cody pointed out, and I really never get to see that as everybody's budget, because we're a small department. We don't have any fluctuation, but I know each department is funded X amount for their employees, and they have turnover, and they may not have so many people on family coverage anymore. And I don't get to see what happens to that money. I guess it lapses and goes back. So I really like that idea of maybe getting that extra money that was originally budgeted back in to pay for employee benefits.
I know that we have turnover, but I don't know that we have.
A few years ago, we had a lot of long-time people that had a lot of leave, that
Right.
we've absorbed all the costs.
Right.
So I can't tell you when and who.
Yeah, I think if we are, we're self-insured, so we are funding our plan ourselves, dollar for dollar, right? Hopefully we get to the point to where it's more than a dollar for dollar, so we get a balance in there, but it's gotta be at least a dollar for dollar. And if we're budgeting a certain amount on employer premiums to get to that dollar amount, and we have fewer employees. So on this form here, it says enrollment, single 519, family 534. That should be a combination of all of our estimated needs and how many we say that we have, on family and how many we have on single. And then you get to that total number, and that's what's budgeted. And if we all pay that in, then we get to that expense amount that we think, and we're all good. But if those numbers drop from there and we're paying in more, or I'm sorry, we're not paying in as much as what was budgeted, which is what John just said. They were budgeted for an amount that they're not getting. The only reason why you wouldn't get the amount that's budgeted, we put the money in everybody's budgets. It's just you don't have that much benefit expense for whatever reason, not everybody, and it's not the same necessarily every single year, but, and there's perfectly legitimate explanations, just like what Brandon mentioned as an example, as to why there may be a difference. But at the end of the day, that's where we get a shortfall into the employee benefits account, is that maybe our estimates were absolutely accurate at the time, but the number of employees that were on there. So we're kind of guesstimating on what our expenses are. We're guesstimating on what our other revenue is, whether it's stop loss reimbursement, rebates, and whatnot. And then, we're kind of guesstimating the number of people that are going to be on the plan to kind of back into what this rate is going to be. Well, you do all of that, and then we wind up with another variable that I've never even really thought about, which is,
This last one.
well, we don't necessarily even pay in for the same number of employees because it's a monthly payroll, pull out. And so we've got variable on top of variable, on top of variable, on top of variable. Whereas if we do come up with a mechanism to where whatever we estimate and we budget for it, it actually goes into employee benefits at the end of the day, then it at least takes one of the variables off the table. So then all we're looking at is, did we overestimate a little bit on our rebates that we need to make up a little bit? But it's mostly, how is our plan performing? And if we were off there, then we have to do a transfer there. But as it is now, we're having to potentially do transfers in a year because the plan has more expenses than we anticipated, and we didn't pay as many in that were budgeted for the employer share.
So really, employers do all different types of ways to fund the plan. Some don't even use employer premiums quote. They do transfers, like Cody's kind of talking, or budget amount for the year and don't base it on that amount. So it's plausible to do it through just a set amount and not rely on rates.
But if we did that, we still have to figure out a way for special revenues, because those that are not general fund, in my opinion, we still need to,
Why can't benefits just invoice the department, just like we do for ARPA or anything else?
that
What'd you say, Brandon?
invoice the department.
Why couldn't benefits just invoice the department? You know what I mean, like kind of like we did for ARPA requests and things like that. And it does seem silly to me that, I mean, while we're not a huge county, we're the biggest in Oklahoma, it does seem silly to have Wilkerson walking around at the end of the year with a bucket in his hand. I mean,
And that's what happens sometimes with self-funded plans, but obviously, like last year, we had a horrible year. But if we can kind of come up with some ways to better prepare for that.
Well, I know last year at budget board, there were some discussions about specialty medications and things of that nature. What would or may not be covered, or what some plans cover and what some do not. Are you seeing any changes with some of those specialty medications?
Huge changes, Our PBM screams at me almost every week. What are you guys doing? What are you thinking?
changes isn't going up, not down.
No,
Right.
changes are cutting
Increase.
stuff. And I said, that's not up to me. Politically, that's not gonna happen. But there's things that we could change, obviously, but that's cutting stuff away from people that are using it.
Right.
But we always could cut and change benefits, but, we haven't approached it that way. We have a lot of cost saving stuff in place, but we haven't looked at cutting things, if that makes sense.
But those cost saving things are not balancing out to it.
They're making up for some of the other things we have, if that makes
Right.
sense.
But are you seeing a driver in some of these special medic?
Oh, yeah.
That's,
Yeah, we're off the chart on weight loss medications and GLP-1 medications.
So is that those?
Yeah.
And
so is some of that attributed to some of this actuary numbers that we're looking at, some of that forecast?
Our prescription plan, if we chose maybe one type of diabetic drug, it's all relying on that. Yeah, we're way out of the norm in that area.
So what would you say, is there a difference have you looked at the difference from
Yeah.
last year, this year?
Well, it kind of started last year, and that's when we saw the increase. It started going up. I kind of mentioned that, we spent about $2+ million on those GLP-1, and then the weight loss drugs. It's up to about $3.6 million now, is what we're spending. Just keep seeing it go up.
what was that again? Say that again. What was it whenever we discussed
It's
it?
about around $2 million.
2 million. And
Now it's
it's up
about
another-
3.6. And just a reminder, we're self-insured, so that you can choose to cover anything you want to. And the long-term effects, who knows? It might have good effects on the plan, but that's just something we pay for that most people don't. And again, our pharmacy benefit manager doesn't understand it. And I said, well, that's what they want to cover, so we have to cover that.
Yeah, I'm not advocating taking something away, I'm
Yeah.
just trying to get a better understanding of, I know that was an issue last year when we were passing the hat. And is it changing? Or are
So
you seeing
long story
changes?
short, I did two different big things on the prescription plan to kind of counteract that spend that we had. Because we saw that spend going up for those GLP-1 drugs. So number one, 7/1, we took 540 retirees off our prescription plan and put them on the Medicare-based prescription plan where they're responsible for the prescriptions. Or we'd have about $2.6 million extra in our prescription spend this year that we don't have. And then 10/1, we changed the PBM, but as you know, prescription costs go up, new drugs become available. It's an ever-growing category. So we're seeing some good cost savings. Our per employee per month costs on our prescriptions are going down versus where our prior carrier was. But it's just trying to counteract everything else. But we're seeing some savings there.
When you talk about the spend, like currently the 3.6 million on these two classes of drugs, I remember there was an amount when we were just looking at the weight loss drugs that we were lumping in the ones that were used for treatment of diabetes. We weren't differentiating when Wegovy was prescribed for diabetes versus for
It
weight
can't
loss.
be prescribed for diabetes legally. So,
Yeah,
we're
they're,
going.
they're separate classes.
Yeah.
Ozempic would be diabetes.
But we had a number at one
Yeah.
point, and about
Yeah.
500,000 of it was.
Jason's right. We were taking the GLP, those drugs that are being treated for folks that are diabetic or pre-diabetic, and the ones that are the weight loss.
Yeah.
Putting them together in talking about that
As a one
that whole
issue.
number. And really, to me, if there's going to be a conversation about it, and I'm not saying that there should or shouldn't be, but if there is, I think those have to be split, because the diabetic and pre-diabetic medications should, I mean, that's
Yeah.
completely different. So I think we've got to be careful when we're talking about a $3.6 million number. Are we talking about both of those, the semaglutide, GLP-1 medications as a whole, or are you talking about just the weight
All
loss?
those, they,
Yeah.
in the pharmaceutical industry, they
I
combine
just want
those
to look
all
out here with
together.
And I
They
a
don't
think,
cloudy
separate them.
Right,
and I think with
so-
that conversation, they had
so-
separated it, and we kind of
So it's a
drilled down to it
combination
was a
of all
smaller
All
amount.
that.
But I
Right,
wanted to feel like it was around
800,000.
800,000.
It was 800,000.
Versus the 1.5 million we
Right.
were discussing, and so we felt like.
Yeah, so
that,
that's
there
where
was
we
less
need to,
impact.
we
Yeah,
need to
be
make sure that,
careful.
that 3.6
comparing
million
apples to
isn't.
apples.
Yeah.
So our prescription costs are going down per employee per month. If you divide it all out, going down. We're seeing higher utilization. Everybody's getting the drugs they need. So we've actually been able to accomplish that, which is a big feat in itself. Because we're very unique, and most plans don't do what we do in terms of the weight loss and stuff. But we're making up for it with the plan changes and stuff like that. With a little cheaper pricing. And the plan changes. So, we expect our prescription costs to be lower, even though we have medications going up, and we're absorbing all that by everything we've done, if that makes sense.
Well, great job
So-
on moving
so here-
retirees.
Here's what I'm hearing, and not just today, but in the past. We're expecting this and we're expecting that, because, and it's got to be expectations right now, because the change July 1 on the retirees, I think we can kind of make a pretty good, call on what those savings are. But the, switching the TPM October 1, we're still trying to kind of figure out exactly where our, how much savings, we're going to have, and the rebate and all of that.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, just kind of out loud, what would be the downside for us? The last few years, we've kind of taken the approach of doing a flat budget to start the year, with the exception of, hey, what is out there that just absolutely, there's no other way, we have to have that increased money at the beginning of the fiscal year. Absent that, we've done kind of a flat budget and looked at September supplement to make any of those modifications. What about doing that same, if we're going to do that same approach this year, do the same thing with the rates? We don't have to set the rates on July 1, I don't think. Is that correct, Christy? September 1 for, the September supplement, October 1st, when we get through all of that, that's when the final budget is, so we can make modifications to the rates. And if we wait until then to have those conversations about the rates for next year on employers, then we get all the way through this fiscal year, so we can look and see how this year compares with last year, which was our bad year, right? So we'll have an analysis of how the plan performed this year. We'll have more idea of how our changes that we made in our plan actually have affected the plan throughout this year. We've also had an opportunity to have some discussions about, do we want to, what I mentioned earlier, how we want to disperse all of that, whether it's through a transfer, keep doing it the way we're doing it, because I understand that would be a big change. We need to have lots of conversations on that. But by us waiting until the September supplement to set the new rates, I think it gives us some time to do more of an analysis on our budget and on the budget as a whole, and then the employee benefits budget. We can, drill down a little bit more on what we expect expenses to be next year, and then be able to work our way into a revenue number.
And then, two, I haven't really spoke about this, but everyone knows HealthSmart, medical TPA, third-party administrator, they pay our claims. They were purchased a couple years ago by UMR, which is a national TPA, and they have a national provider network that employers like us would really not get to utilize and do deals like the surgery center and do the special deals. They don't like competition. But long story short, UMR is rebranding. CallSmart is UMR coming 7/1 for us. And we get access to their network, their provider network. And we did an analysis, and that's gonna give us a little buffer for trend, basically. Their network has better discounts. It's a carrier network, so we're gonna see a little savings on the medical claims going into next fiscal year. And it's just not a different company, same people working behind the scenes, just rebranding, but they have a way better provider network with the bigger discounts, because they're nationwide, they have, real good negotiating power, so we can help our medical plan a little bit as well.
Similar to when we made that prescription change a few years ago, going to that bigger company that had way more access to cheaper medications.
So yeah, that just kind of came about, but I just wanted to tell you that to kind of look on the outlook that we should see a little more savings on our medical claims going into next fiscal year.
Our actuary number, do you come up with those, or is that a vendor that we use?
So we use an actuary Sage View, and they plug it in and plug our numbers in and come up with the rates.
I'm guessing there's a fee associated with that service.
Oh, yeah.
It is, but I also think it's a requirement to be
That's-
self-insured.
That was my next
Have an
question.
actuary. Whether you follow it or not, I
That
think
you have to have an actuary.
And I think even if we're deviating the way we have, on employee rates as well, having those numbers and being able to track those over time is still extremely beneficial and helpful. But I think as we go forward, talking to the clerk's office, looking at, I think when we all do our estimate of needs, going in and adding up the total number of family, total number of single for everybody, and then looking at HR reports to see the actual spend every year and look at like a 5-year rolling average so that we can kind of drill down a little bit more and see how well we're doing on our estimation on those numbers, so we can get a little bit, better handle on that and be able to track problems before they become problems. I guess track potential problems before they become problems, which circles back to if we have a buffer in the account, like last year, if you need $2 million and you have $5 million buffer, okay, it's going to pull that down to $3 million. We don't really need to make any drastic changes for next year because this was a really bad year and it took $2 million off of that balance. We still have 3, so we still have plenty of room. Now we'll be tracking it next year to see if we need to make changes for that next year. So we would be able to have a 2 to 3 year look into the future before having to make changes, so that we're not knee-jerk reacting to potential problems that maybe aren't problems. It also gives us time to do a more in-depth dive, so that something that we think isn't a big problem actually may be a big problem that is just kind of festering and we don't see it yet, but it has the potential for exponential growth as it relates to a problem. So,
Do you have an idea of what that fee is that we pay for that service? Just
Yeah,
out of
Oh,
curiosity.
the actuary?
20.
yeah, it's 20. Yeah.
Now, this would be something different. Normally, we address our employer rates, in time for July 1. If we want to wait till September, that's fine. I would say that's high priority
Mhm.
increase number 1. I just don't want to lose where we've always had it July 1, and so September, we're talking about everything else. So if we just keep our minds that that's got to be our number 1 priority as far as funding the supplement, then.
Well, and I think what we could do is, as we go through the budget analysis, like we did last year, I would anticipate, even if we all agree that we want to stay flat, and budget board is fine with us staying flat to the end of the year, we still do a deep dive into the estimate of needs, and we pull increases onto a worksheet like what we did last year, dollar amounts associated with it, some descriptions associated with it, and that worksheet is what we begin working off of for September supplement. And so our dollar amount, which I think the increased premium was going to generate 3.2, 3.6, whatever that number is, that would be on that worksheet, be the top of the list. as far as when we're looking at stuff in September, so we don't forget about it. But I completely agree.
Yeah, it's just something we've always addressed July 1, and it's always been done. So if we're committed to, I'm open to wait to September if we're committed to, making sure that's a priority. Obviously, it has to be, we have to pay our bills.
Right.
Would that more align us with the employee rates as we start coming up into the January timeframe, making the adjustments to
Yeah,
that
because we
as
usually
well?
look at those, we always try to do those prior to November 1st.
Right.
Yes, we'll have that
It's
information
usually
available for
September,
you
October, so
all
we'd
to
be doing it all at the same time.
We will.
Yeah,
We will.
yeah.
And
We
I think
just
it'll,
address it at the same time.
I think it'll be very beneficial, because then if we're addressing them at the same time, now when we put them into effect, the employer rate would go into effect a couple months earlier, but we could have those discussions and know what we're doing with the employee premium so that we can fill that pie.
And we'll have the new employer suggested rate at the same time, so that's perfect.
I mean, the employer rates though, it would be, we would retro them back to July 1, right? I think we'd have to.
Well,
Back in the actuary.
Not
Yeah,
necessarily.
not necessarily.
Not necessarily. You could start October 1. I mean, say we decided we're 2 million short. I mean, you gotta get the 2 million. So I don't know why you'd retro back. You just take the 2 million October for 10 months or 9 months and just fund it then. I think it'd be okay. I don't think you have to go back. Now, what you're losing a little bit, say we put the rates in July 1, we did the increase per the actuary like we've always done before. So employees' benefits would be getting the benefit of getting those dollars July, August, September.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm curious, when we're talking about the actuary, we've always done it that way. Have we ever gone back and looked at how the actuaries' data tracked with reality?
Yes.
And have we looked at our actuals over a period of time?
Here,
yes.
Over time, they're not close.
It's not even close.
Yeah, not even the same ballpark.
We beat their estimations.
So if we based it, if our expenses were, for this current fiscal year, were based on the actuary report that was adopted, is that right?
Yes.
Okay, John pointed out, we're a little over $800,000. The estimate was a little over $800,000 less on expenses. So we want to talk about the $1 million gap on premiums. You can't consider that in isolation, I don't think, unless you're considering the expense side. The actuary we adopted it, they were off by what it looks like. We don't know what the end of the year holds, but by more than 800,000. Is it not incumbent upon us, if we're going to make a recommendation that anybody would listen to, wouldn't we need to take that into account? Is that what you're talking about by waiting?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because if we wait, we're gonna have more information, more accurate information. We'll still be estimating, guesstimating, but we will be doing it with more up-to-date, accurate information than what we're operating off of now.
You make a motion to receive that.
Got a motion and a second hang on one second. We got a motion and a second to receive the document that John just handed out. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Ayes have it. Okay.
So that report just goes over the last 9 fiscal years and compares it to the actuary percentage increase, actuary dollar increase for prescription medical, and then just goes over our stop loss increases, just the average stop loss increases over the years. But, some years we've gone up 20-something%, and we wouldn't have expected that. And then some years we went way down. So on the average, we're lower than the actuary recommendation, but we've had years that flowed out of the water.
So what you're talking about, Cody, by trying to carry a balance in this ongoing account, is to tackle these years where you have a 42% increase.
Absolutely.
Is that 42% on your prescription, is that gonna be tied to those specialty drugs?
That was really when those came out, kind of. So back in 2017, we changed prescription plans, kind of got on the best one around, and saw some savings, and then it started ramping up those GLP-1 drugs, and all the other new drugs started ramping up. And although we were on one of the best ones around, it wasn't really transparent. So we got the new one, it just kind of came out, and that's where we saw the big increase back then.
Because we're not gonna see a difference. I mean, I'm expecting we're gonna see at least what we had previous, if not more, as we move forward.
Yeah.
On those drugs, but the change in the overall
Yeah,
aspect.
overall,
Right.
you just have to remember though, prescription's the most volatile too, and that's the biggest increase of any employer's using prescription drugs, but we're doing everything we can to keep it down.
Seems like prescriptions are so cyclic though. I mean, now there's a whole plethora of generics for ADHD, for example, which are outrageously priced too. You know?
Right.
And now there's a new one, Wegovy is approved for weight loss, and now it's just got approved for cardiac conditions, so anybody with a cardiac condition can medically qualify for Wegovy soon. So that opens up a whole nother ball of wax on that. Those are about $1,000 a month.
Can you include reimbursements in this as well?
Yeah.
That gives us another category and more data.
Yeah, reimbursements, and you would include rebates and stuff with the reimbursements, right? That's what you're talking about, Rick?
Yeah.
Yeah, rebates and reimbursements,
We need all the information that's available.
Yep.
Not partial.
When we go back and compare what really happened to what the actuary did, how much of that process includes an analysis of what caused the difference? I mean, I know you do probably, but I don't know how widely that's considered. But if we're 800,000 down this year, but we're up another year, what accounts for those kinds of swings based on what the actuary does? Is it because they look at national figures and we're counter-cyclical, or and then how do we account for that every year? Because it is a little bit of a clue that maybe we adjust up or down depending on what we know to be true historically.
Well, one thing, just as an example, most people, when they're looking at, industry, they're looking at, everything. And most plans, correct me if I'm wrong, but they don't have the 100% benefit like what we have on a lot of our stuff. And I know a lot of you have heard this before, but, several years ago, my son had, we had to have an ACL replacement for him. And we utilized 100% benefit, used McBride, and I think the overall bill, it was somewhere around like $12,000, right? If we would have gone to Baptist, or I shouldn't say Baptist, any other, all of the others that are not on the 100% plan, it was going to be in the 30s. In the $30,000 range. So we weren't out deductible or anything, and it sounds like, well, that's a coup for the employee. Well, but if I would have gone somewhere else and been out, say, a $3,000 deductible, and it was $30,000, well, okay, I'm out $3,000. Well, now the county's out $27,000 instead of the $12,000. So that's kind of part of this. Why we beat the national trends is because we have things that John has been very cutting edge going out and finding ways that we can save money, and that was with one of the best surgeons around. I mean, it was the guy that it wasn't like we were trying to pick from the Yelp reviews or anything. I mean, it was one of the absolute best.
I'm thinking too about, we had conversations with John with finance and so on, but is that something where we can kind of develop a system or a calculation to adjust based on what we know to be true historically, John, and what you see in Oklahoma versus elsewhere, that we can pinpoint with a little more accuracy what we expect on expenses and adjust premiums accordingly? I mean, is there a way to tweak it? Because we know if you take the 3 months, which is what happened, projecting the budget number we have now, the number was a lot wider or higher than if you'd have taken the whole previous year, even though you'd had plan changes in the meantime. So as we see lessons like that, a way of setting kind of, so we're all on the same page as to how the numbers are arrived at from generation to generation, and because that's been part of the disconnect here. I'm just thinking if in this process we take the actuary report and make any adjustments we know that makes sense based on what our experience has been. Because we would sit down with whoever to do that and put that into place.
I do want to ask a question for historical reference, and it's probably painfully apparent to anybody sitting at this table but me. But if we've got 1.2 million on average short in medical every year or under, and 300,000 short in pharmacy every year, so 1.5 million. So doing some quick math, 1.5 million times 9 is 13.5 million. So based on what the actuary said we would spend, and we chose to go with the actuary rates every single year up to this point, the plan was $13.5 million under over the course of that 9 years, and it's cash flow broke. I cannot wrap my head around that at all.
Well, what the actuary, so you probably don't remember this, the actuary looks at our expenses, they put trend in it, they carry it forward, and their rates are supposed to be effective for the year. So, hey, county, if you implement these employee rates January 1st, you implement these employer rates, this is gonna probably cover your expected costs if things go awry. And again, we don't go with those rates. We usually don't do the employee rate, and then we don't do the employer rate until the following July.
This is a crazy question, but would there be any way to know without an extensive amount of research, if we would have chose the employee rates every year for these, what the premium to date would be?
Oh, we can look at the most recent, I have it right here.
Meaning you're saying the actuarial.
Yeah,
The
like you see what I'm saying? If we saved $13.5 million over what they said, and we chose the vast majority of the employee premiums are certainly the employer side of it, not the employee. The employee puts in pennies compared to the employer. What is it, 85-15? I mean, or something close to that. I mean, I am just.
So Brandon, our
That's
expenses, see, that report says, oh yeah, we saved money compared to the actuary. We still saw increases though. We didn't come in under, like overall, so like certain years we went way over.
Sure.
So we still had increases, but it was less than the averages, the national averages.
John, on this report, you're gonna add the reimbursements and rebates.
Uh-huh.
Can you also combine for a total between the prescription claims and the medical claims? That way we can see the overall increase in savings with them added together. Thank you.
Chrissy, you mentioned that it was a requirement that we have an actuary.
I think it is to be self-insured.
Okay. Is there any ramifications if we do not go with those numbers?
I don't think so.
I'd hate to get that pulled from us, but.
Would
Oh, we don't have to go with the numbers.
Yeah.
You just have to have the actuarial done and filed. You don't have to go by it.
It's a compliance exercise.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's in the file.
$24,000.
That's my whole point.
Yeah, you don't have to follow it.
Crossing our eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a real good benchmark to see though.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
is.
They
I
have.
think it's beneficial.
Well, and if nothing else, it's very helpful information to show how much
How
better
well.
our plan is performing versus the national average.
And let me talk real quick. We're the only governmental plan in Oklahoma. The state doesn't do it. The cities don't do it. The counties don't do it. When you retire with us, we still pay basically the full employer share of their health care. So we have a lot more risk that we're dealing with, a lot of aged population than most plans do. And we have an older population. Most plans on purpose are putting a $5,000, $10,000 deductible in place because then there's an avoidance of care. Those employees aren't going to be there for the long term, so the employer's like, hey, I don't have much risk. We have a total different set of risk with employees staying long term and being on the hook all the way into retirement for their health care versus everybody else. So that we do a lot of different things to try to manage that risk.
The gist of what we've talked about here is to hold up on making a recommendation to the budget board for a full year rate set, but to basically recommend that they stay with the actuary report or where we are now and
Or
revisit
somewhere
in
between.
September.
Amen.
Yeah, what I was saying was, unless I'm missing something, and very well could be, I don't see a downside of us holding steady with where our rates are right now, so that we can do a better analysis of how our plan performs this year and consider what those expenses are likely to be going forward, and also have conversations about how we are determining and transferring money from the employer, whether it's general fund or special revenue, going forward. And I think if we wait until the final budget on October 1st, I think we've got plenty of time to be able to wait and get more accurate information so that we're not flying as blind as we would be right now.
But the sheet from last BET where it shows the shortfall this fiscal year of $1,057,000, what's the percentage on that? Do you know? Because I'm looking at the percentages here where I'm trying to figure out where we're gonna fall along this 9-year chart.
I haven't completed that or updated it yet.
Of course, this is against actuary, not against budget. But
Yeah, so what, we hope to do is come up with a budget now that once the rates are decided on, and work with the committee on a budget.
But I think going forward, unless I'm looking at it backwards, I think we actually need to do it the opposite. I think we need to have the expense guesstimation first. That way we can work into how we're going to fund that expense. Because if we don't know the expense and we're just picking a number, we could pick a number and wind up not being able to cover the expense. So I think we need to have that number first. And by waiting until October 1st, it gives us a better opportunity to look at this year and how we perform this year. Because we were saying last year, and we've been saying, well, last year, that's that 1 year out of 7 that is just really, really bad. And so let's not anticipate it being like that year in and year out. Well, with the specialty drugs and stuff that we've seen, maybe last year was 1 out of 7, maybe it wasn't. But after we get through this year, we'll have a better indication of how we performed, and it'll help us on the expense side, and then working into the revenue side. It's a cake once we come to an expense.
And I think that was a fence I couldn't get off of is, to me, benefits, I don't really care what the budget is, just because the expense is the expense. We gotta figure out how to pay for that.
Yeah.
I don't care.
We don't control.
I don't care if your budget's $100 million or $1 million. The expense is the expense.
Right.
So let's just figure out how to pay for that, whatever that number is.
Right. But until we have that number, we can't figure
But when you say budget, you mean what's it gonna cost us? You don't mean,
So the estimated 24-25 employee benefits budget, it would have all the expenses in it. We still need to come up with that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. We don't have that.
Well, you should have a much bigger goal because you've got $1 million, I guess, shortfall or whatever that figure, 977,000, depends on which calculation you use. You're short because you budgeted revenue at a certain level, but then you're also on the expense side, another $800,000+. So you really should be somewhere close to $2 million short between the two. We're not going to be that short, I don't think. It doesn't look like it. So my question is, what are the contributing factors to us being off, and how do we account for it? But when we make a recommendation for the budget board to follow the actuary, are we talking about the actuary's guess for expenses only and ignoring what they say about the rates, recommending rates that would cover the expenses?
Well, if we, in the past, when we make a recommendation to follow the actuary's recommendation, that recommendation is the rate. But the actuary
based on the
got to that rate
based
on their analysis of the expense. So that's why I'm saying we need to first get our heads wrapped around that expense side. So
did the actuary from last year to this fiscal year, because we only increased the premium, the employer side, by $1,
Mm-hmm.
and that's all they recommended we do? Okay.
So the only consequence of accepting the actuary rates would be more money in benefits than we possibly.
Well, we're also looking at, if we do that now, can we even start the year at a flat budget?
because our reserve is so low.
Yeah, because if you think about it, right now, a flat budget, when you say flat budget, you would be talking about your budget that you have right now, right? Not the budget that you got July 1. So your budget right now is July 1 plus the supplement. Generally, we've been getting closer and closer, and I don't know that we would have, I mean, you're gonna know better than me, but it's gonna be pretty difficult probably to start off the fiscal year with everybody's budget staying flat, no reductions, and increase employer premiums by 20%.
I think it's pretty easy, in my opinion, to decide to do the employer rates now when that employer rate increase is $800,000. We anticipate putting $6 or $7 million into reserve as compared to who knows even what we'll be able to put into reserve at all in a flat budget. And then we're asking for 2.7 out of the general fund. That gets a little bit difficult for me to understand where the money's coming from.
Does that hurt you in any way for us to look at September?
So what I understand is if we just didn't do anything on the rates, the same employer contributions would go in, the same transfer as last year would go in, same employee money would go in, so we'd be kind of the same until September. So unless we went into a cash crunch somehow in the first several months and, had some huge claims come in, I think we'd be okay because we'd be running on the same exact budget we are now.
But what we have to consider though is those first few months, if we wind up, and I'm not recommending leaving rates the same, I'm just saying maybe not change them yet and make that call for October 1.
I'm trying to hit that little target window between September and when we set that number.
Right, so the thing is, if we don't change the rates right now and we wait until October 1 and there is a cash crunch, it's not like the $3.6 million that those increased rates are going to generate. That's not going to be available to them on day one because they're going to get a 12th of that and then another 12th and another 12th. So it's not like they're going to have the rest of the year. Now we don't put all that cash in at once, but they're going to have their full year approved budget available whenever we can move that cash in.
So kind of
For
like
those first few months. So it's even if it is a bad few months, they've got the whole year. Yeah.
catch up, because usually we run into cash crunch.
Right, at the end. That's all I'm asking.
So, yeah, I think
Because we all operate in that same manner. We get the same as we had last year in theory, that we can operate at least through the September supplement without those issues.
Yeah, we should have some relief on the medical
That was
stuff.
okay with you.
Yeah, we should have a little relief on the medical claim 7-1 too, so that should help.
Would we run into any problem, because it's my understanding that the second half of the year typically is a little more expensive than the first half of the year. So if our premiums are coming in pretty steady throughout the year, are we banking some money cash flow wise at the beginning of the year to cover the increased expenses at the end?
That we very well could be. I mean, traditionally, my recollection is that the back half of the year is more expensive than the first half of the year. But that kind of feeds into what I'm talking about.
Building
If we wait till October, yes, first, yeah, build a reserve. But if we wait to adopt next year's rates until October, for the October 1 cycle, we'll be able to see what the end of this fiscal year does and how it performs, and be able to have a more educated recommendation on what that rate should be.
Winter.
I think I'm like Christie, that is our main focus at that point in time. Because like I said, I hear Danny's ghost saying, but that would be something I think that we, as long as that's the awareness of that.
Priority.
Yeah, the priority of it.
I mean, here's the thing, 20% may not be enough.
Right.
That's my concern. It's not that we're gonna put 20% in and we shouldn't be putting 20% in. We may need to put more than that in. I mean, we just don't know. And I think by waiting, we can get that number. Yeah, and we can get a better handle on where we're at. And if it needs to be 25%, if it needs to be 30%, I mean, that has to be, and we treat the watch list like that too, that the employee benefits is the number one. I mean, that always is because we have to pay that bill. We have to. So, yes, that would be, I think, everybody's priority coming in. But we would know if 20% is enough, or if it's too much, or if it's dead on accurate. So, that's just my thought. I mean,
Kind of coming full circle, I just want to make sure we answer the budget board's question, and I'm unclear what that question is.
We didn't
I'm
get any
still-
Yeah, we
directions.
didn't, yeah,
There was no direction, okay.
the item was just struck.
So we have a motion passed on the record already to do a recommendation to adopt. And that's what's binding right now, so we need to amend that if we're gonna do what we're talking about. The concept needs to be to amend that, or
Not necessarily. I mean, we made a recommendation, budget board chose to strike it, it's dead in the water. I mean, we just recommend, so anytime we've recommended and the budget board has done something different, varied, struck it, we've never come back and
We start
undone.
over.
I mean,
okay, so it's disposed of more or less that way. Okay, that's what I was not sure about.
Budget board's governing body.
Right, I knew, I just didn't know.
yeah, we don't need to take action to.
and if everybody, I mean, if you guys want to make a recommendation so that it goes into effect July 1, I'm cool with that too. I think sitting here today, I would rather have John, I would rather not make a decision today and have John
Data.
get that data as best as he can. I do think we could get better data if we waited. I think it would be a little more beneficial, but I think that we need more data. I need more data to be able to make a recommendation. So whether that's recess and have him and finance try to cobble some stuff together over the next few days and come back, or whether it's, hey, let's go ahead and look at it after the beginning of the fiscal year, once we have all the numbers in for this current fiscal year, and be able to make a better assumption on what the next year is going to look like based on real data.
John, any major concerns with that?
It's just really, again, how you're gonna fund it, through transfer, through premiums, through, that's what it comes down to, and how much you're gonna fund, and how much do we estimate expenses are. So I think that's a good method to.
I think also at the same time, it would be nice to have, I don't serve on this committee, but it'd be nice to have a report in regards to fluctuations in prescriptions year over year. So that way, at that time, so we can say, okay, well, maybe we need to cut back, or maybe we need to eliminate, or, what can we do in order to help with these premiums moving
I think it
forward
would be helpful if we differentiate between those two,
for the diabetic
yes,
and primary weight
separation,
loss.
that just so there's no confusion moving forward, that everybody takes that same assumption, at least there's a defined number.
And I know that
If
was-
that's possible.
Oh, yeah, there is. Yeah, so those are our highest spend on a prescription list of those. I can report on kind of where we're trending and all our different costs and where it's going month to month and what drugs are popping up.
So is it, you're able to, like, based on diagnosis code, they get X drug, or?
Yeah, so what we do is, drugs are based in a classification, kind of, but, for diagnosis, they're approved for different conditions, but there's like weight loss, and then there's diabetic drugs, there's allergy drugs, there's, but I can show all that stuff and kind of show you where we're trending and what's driving our cost.
Well, let's say hypothetically, so let's say that somebody, I'm asking just for reporting purposes, so let's say that somebody was taking Ozempic that does not have a diabetic diagnosis code. And I'm.
They'll have to have a diagnosis.
So how would you find that?
So what happened is, when we switched
They won't have
carriers.
to know somebody that is doing it.
Yeah, so traditionally, all PBMs, pharmaceutical benefit managers work, they go by the FDA, what the drug is approved for. There's criteria, you have to meet this, and this, look over medical records, check, you're approved, yes. You don't meet that, no, you don't get it. It's not approved by the FDA for that.
Yeah.
So CVS Caremark, our old PBM, was letting some go through, was checking some went through without checking. All the PBMs I know,
The new one went back through and checked.
well,
everybody.
what they did is they grandfathered
But
people
I think
in.
they grandfathered.
They grandfathered people in. They said, hey, if you're already on that drug, you're used to taking it, we're not gonna make you go back through recertification, but any new people, I've had people cuss me out and call me and scream and yell at me all the time. I want this drug, I want this drug. I said, well, you don't qualify for it through the FDA. And so the new prescription company's going right by the FDA qualifications for our drugs, but there's still that class of people who don't have type 2 diabetes taking type 2 diabetic thing for weight loss. And that's kind of what.
I don't know where everybody else is, but I do see some utility there getting that. But to your point about the splitting of the two, I almost think if we're having a conversation, it probably should just be about the one and not even throw any of the dollar amounts related to the ones that are prescribed for diabetic or whatever, because those are ones that, I mean, are we gonna?
It's a necessity.
Yeah.
Well, what most
Yeah.
companies do, and traditionally we haven't done it, is, and a firm's doing it, they change their formulary every year and say, hey, this is our preferred drug, this is our non-preferred drug. And real high-cost drugs like that, you would say, okay, we get the best deal on Ozempic. So it's your preferred drug, we get the best rebate. If you're on Ozempic, you pay less copay. If you're on one of the lower class ones, it costs way more. We get less rebate, then we financially incentivize people to take the one.
I just remember last year,
Yeah.
where all of a sudden it was a big topic of conversation during budget
It all
board.
got
And
lumped
we didn't
together.
have a
It all
lot
got
of
lumped together.
information about it. And so tracking it in regards to decisions being made in regards to prescriptions would just be helpful if we do have to make some type of, decision
Yeah.
in regards to make some changes to our prescription coverage. It'd be nice for you guys to be able to say, okay, well, we've been tracking it and this is what we're seeing, and it helps, the elected officials make that decision. Based off
better
of-
decisions.
Well, if it's one of the biggest cost drivers on the pharmacy plan and on the plan overall, to know.
That way
To
it's
have
not
a
such
breakout
all of a
of those
sudden that, oh my
things.
gosh, what are we gonna do?
We can have our PBM come out and do a presentation, because they have multiple clients.
Well,
If you want to.
maybe, but I mean, that's,
I
mean,
think just for
we can't
tracking
do that on here,
purposes, yeah.
yeah, but I do think that if we are tracking something like that, we need to make sure, because I think we all heard 3.6 earlier, and some people might interpret that as, oh, that's the Wegovy and whatever else, but it's both.
It's all-
And so some people are going, saying it's this, and some people are going and saying it's that. We need to just have the conversation about those others. If we're having a discussion about any of them, it just needs to be those ones that.
It's reasonable to assume if we hear that number, it's about the weight
Yeah.
I
loss.
think it's
Just a
okay to do
recommendation.
both of them, as long as we have the separation, just so we know what
Right.
each of them are. And if we want to present one side or the other, that's fine, or both sides, that's fine too. But I think it's important at least to know that difference between them.
Yeah, I was only asking to make sure you don't have to go down 1,000 rabbit holes and pull
Oh,
up
I
every
know.
single person's chart.
Well, that's
Yeah.
what we
Yeah.
talked about last year, is
Yeah.
making
Easily
a determination,
click
but
button.
there was no way to do that.
There's no really way, that's why they
So-
grandfather everybody in.
Yeah. The grandfather
That's
ones,
what I'm worried
you
about.
won't be able to pull out, but
So they denied maybe 150 fills on ones that didn't qualify. We kind of worked through those medically, saying, hey, and it's working. I mean, people understand, if you don't qualify, you wouldn't qualify for under any prescription plan to take this medication. So there's good things in terms of what should be happening behind the scenes on the prescription plan now.
I just don't want everybody to get lumped into one thing, and those that need it are looked at, I need that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm not trying to take something away from somebody that needs it. That's
Exactly.
the whole point.
So when the actuary looks at our expenses and uses a national model, are they, I guess they're looking at our data too, so it would include the weight loss and the diabetes version.
They just look.
So we operate in some respects outside of what they're looking at.
All they do is look at
Overall.
numbers.
But yes, they are looking at that because those claims are
Are in our
included in our.
numbers.
So that's what I thought. So there is, I
Oh,
just
yeah.
want to make sure they're not excluded from that. That would be a problem. Okay.
So no action on that item?
Ever looking?
So are you gonna recommend to not?
There's no action.
I just
Well-
won't add it to the.
I mean,
Nothing to go back to
Budget-
budget.
budget board has a meeting, I mean, do we want to tell them what our thoughts are or just?
And that's what I mean, is there's a meeting that's set up specifically for this. And that's what right?
We had no direction.
On April first, and that was that's why I keep asking that. That's like the broken record. Because I just want to make sure on April first, we have an answer for them.
I mean, you could do a BT update.
But I don't know what, I mean, does
We're gonna
everybody,
cancel
Look
it.
at it.
does everybody want
I'm sure there's other items
want me to
now.
say, hey,
Okay.
we don't have anything, or, you know, we want to wait a few days to get some more information, and then we can bring something back for you for, you know, July 1, or we're going to wait and get our hard numbers for this year and look at a potential change in the employer premium going into effect October 1st. I mean, I would prefer, if I'm going to need to get up there and answer questions and give them kind of the will of this group, I would prefer us to tell me what you want.
Well, that's what I was saying. I mean, I'm happy to.
Because I don't want to get up there and just espouse my viewpoint, because that's not my role whenever I get up there. It's, I mean, you guys know I've sold things that I voted against, right? Because that is about BET, and I want to make sure that I am advocating on behalf of this group and what the will of this group is.
Well, I'll move that you report recommendation to them to leave the rates where they are through the September adjustments, and that we'll come back with another recommendation at that point based on more comprehensive data. And
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Is there any questions? Any more comments? Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Ayes have it. All right.
Glad you're back.
Thank you. It's good to be back.
Thank you.
Pressure off me.
If I was home for another day, I think my wife would have killed me.
I was disappointed he wasn't walking around like Walter Brennan.
Yeah, you're
I saw
moving
him,
around.
he looked really good. So
Yeah.
didn't have that old limp.
All right, any citizens participation? Seeing none, board comments, District 2,
None for me?
clerk?
Yeah, I was remiss last time. Jennifer Murphy's joined as our principal in our finance department. She's, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but worked in and around Boeing, both in Seattle and here since 2006, and most recently as a private contractor after retirement. And so we're lucky to have her, and I'm seeing the hiring decision pay huge dividends since you've been here. So if you haven't had a chance to meet her, say hi and introduce yourself, and glad you're here.
Yeah, I will make a comment even though he left. I just want to show appreciation for John and all his hard work and working with the team in order to have a better understanding and provide this reporting, because I know, and doing a great job to try to help provide cost savings. And then also want to show appreciation, since I don't get to sit in here very often, for Cody in regards to your leadership as chairman. We really appreciate how you handle the group and how you listen and how you advocate. So thank you.
And please
for
don't
your hard
leave us
work.
again. Like you did.
I was sitting in the parking lot of a Petco because I couldn't sit at home, and I'm like,
Listening.
yeah, the windows are down, and I'm like, you know, talking to whoever's around, and people are like looking at me. District 3, treasurer,
Nothing.
board clerk, assessor.
We're actively working returns and assessments in preparation for April estimates.
Awesome. Chair. All right. Thanks for the kind words. It's great to be back. I missed all of you guys. I really, really did. Jennifer's been great. I've had the opportunity to visit with her on several occasions now, and she's very sharp and very approachable, and I think you guys made a wise choice, and I appreciate John and everybody. Carrie's visited with me about this stuff. Jason as well. So, and Brandon has reached out and kind of let me know, you know, while I was out, what's going on and stuff. So I really appreciate it. You guys are awesome.
That was the source.
Leak.
The link.
All right. Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll motion to adjourn.
Is there a second? There's a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We stand adjourned.
Willing to get rid of the leaves.
Hey, Jess,